Today on Dodson's Corner, we are going to be choosing the best current UFC fighters in all of these UFC styles on the screen now. Dylan, start us off. Who is your number one pick, the best boxing fighter in the UFC?
It's a tough one because you don't have a ton of people who are like strictly boxers. A lot of them are kickboxers, but I felt like this guy was more so a boxer. I went Dustin the Diamond Poirier.
I like that. That's a great
I
pick.
think if you put this guy in a boxing ring, he does a lot better than a lot of the other boxers.
Yeah, he has good head movement. He has good combinations. That's one of the things that a lot of UFC fighters miss out on. Their combinations are not there. They throw one or two punches and then they kind of back out into range. Dustin, you see him stay in range. I think of the Dan Hooker fight. That comes to mind first, just staying in the pocket and throwing. He does take a lot of damage, but I think with bigger boxing gloves,
Yeah.
he could definitely do really well.
Who's your pick for boxing, Lucas?
Do you have a guess?
Is it Max?
It's Max Holloway.
It was such a tough one because I was like, is Max really truly a boxer?
Well, he doesn't throw many kicks.
That is true.
Actually, thinking about it, he hardly throws any kicks.
I don't remember I think they have him listed as Muay Thai on the UFC website as his fighting style.
Really?
Yeah, which was one that I found a little bit interesting because that's who immediately I went to check.
Yeah, I don't know. I just think his volume, his power is getting a lot better. And I think that if you throw him in the boxing ring where it is more about points,
Yeah, it's volume.
I think that he does wonders. Like, he reminds me a little bit of an Usyk, kind of moving around, throwing tons of punches, doesn't get KOs all the time, but looks amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to kickboxing. Dylan, this should be a lock. Who do you have for kickboxing?
There's only one answer. Shama. Alex Pereira.
Yeah, that's who I have as well. Alex Pereira. Literally not even close.
Yeah. No one's touching him in terms of his kickboxing.
1 year ago or 2 years ago, I would have said Izzy is like...
Even 1 year ago, like post Izzy losing to Sean, maybe you consider Leon.
Yeah.
I think technically Leon is a great kickboxer, but it's so clearly Alex Pereira right now.
Yeah, it's actually interesting how a lot of these striking champions, I wouldn't say they're getting fraud checked because you're not a fraud as a champion, but they're getting checked because they don't know how to grapple.
These striking first champions are getting exposed by these wrestlers and these jiu-jitsu and these grapplers, except for Pereira.
Pretty much. And he has had some favorable matchups. But again, I think that he had Jan Blachowicz, which was a close fight, but he still won that. And Jan just wrestled him the whole time. And I think he beats Ankalaev. He's not scared to fight Dricus. He's just good. He's too good. Okay, next up for wrestling. This one was super tough for me because there's actually lots of great wrestlers in the UFC. You even have people like Volkanovski, who I would say is criminally underrated for his wrestling. He kept up with Islam. That's insane.
Yeah.
So who do you have for wrestling?
For wrestling, I went with the GOAT, John Jones.
Ooh, that's a little bit controversial because we haven't seen him in his prime for a little while.
Yeah, we haven't seen him wrestle, but I still do think in terms of pure wrestling, it is John Jones because a lot of these Kazakhstani grapplers, I lean a little bit more towards the more so Sambo than wrestling. But in terms of pure wrestling, John Jones.
That's a fair take. He didn't even cross my mind. I went with Khamzat Chimaev.
That's another fair take.
Because he hasn't had many fights against high-level people, but the way that he dominates them in the first and second rounds usually, it's pretty much unheard of. I mean, people were calling him the next Khabib as he was taking those fights on short notice and just dominating people. And yes, it has changed a little bit with his recent performances, but I think that if he didn't have to cut and you just put him in the cage as a sparring match or as a normal wrestling match, I think that he dominates everyone.
Yeah, so it's safe to say if you're a wrestler in the UFC, you probably will never fight.
Pretty much. I was thinking of some Dagestani guys as well, but I was like, I want to keep them for Sambo.
Yeah, and we kept him for Sambo, so I kind of was immediately eliminated every Kazakhstani fighter.
I could see also in the past, maybe you pick Kamaru Usman, Colby Covington, like someone like that. But honestly, it feels like the times are changing so much in the UFC.
You can't just be a wrestler. You have to be a little bit more diverse in terms of like grappling, you know?
Unless you're Bilal Muhammad.
Yeah.
I would say he's high up there as well.
Yeah, it's another name I considered. I also considered Merab.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, after his recent performance at 306, he's
not active. Like, it's just like he's wrestling for control time. And I don't think he has dominant wrestling.
whereas Hamzat just mauls people.
Just choke him out.
Okay, next up we have Jiu-Jitsu. Dylan, who did you pick as your Jiu-Jitsu practitioner?
This was such a tough one. There's so many great Jiu-Jitsu based fighters, but I went with my guy, Charles Oliveira.
That's fair.
Who did you go with for Jiu-Jitsu?
So there was a pick between two. My first original thought was Charles, and I was like, well, let me do some research between Brian Ortega and Charles Oliveira. Because Brian Ortega is someone who you don't maybe immediately think of as the best because Charles is just so well known. But he is, in my opinion, he can work off of his back better than almost anyone. And he finds submissions actively. So in my research, Brian Ortega is a first degree BJJ black belt, but he's trained by Renner Gracie. Charles Oliveira is a third degree black belt, and he got his black belt quite a while ago, like over 10 years ago. So he has more experience. They both have competition experience. But just because third degree to first degree is quite a big difference,
Huge.
I have to go Charles.
Yeah. And I think if Brian Ortega was so great off his back, he should have won that fight against Diego Lopez. Against Diego Lopez because he got flatlined and was on his back multiple times.
Yeah, it's different when you're injured.
Yeah,
but
obviously.
Still.
But yeah, it's tough. There are other great jiu-jitsu fighters too. Like I even considered Ilya because I think technically they consider him jiu-jitsu, but I just think he's so well-rounded that in terms of pure jiu-jitsu, Charles, but you even have to look at the young Brazilian who just beat Brian Ortega, Diego Lopez. I think his jiu-jitsu is very like diverse. Like he's very creative and like funky with it, you know? He's able to like get out of weird situations or create weird stuff. Like he's fighting for madness.
I think Islam is also a black belt in jiu-jitsu. I'm pretty sure. Because he's always the one who's criticizing these guys saying, oh, they're not a real black belt. Tom Aspinall is also another shout. He is a legit black belt who's been training since he was 4 or 5 from his dad.
Yeah, and then there's me who's a jiu-jitsu blue belt.
I considered you on the list.
Yeah, like I was in like the top 10, but I love when people comment about how we're like, oh, these non-athletes are blah, 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 blah. I was like, have you seen the other MMA YouTubers? Like
that's why they don't show their face.
We're in a lot better shape. Like,
are you like trying to call out someone right now? Like, who are you talking about here?
There's a lot of comments. Like you more so don't see them on YouTube, but like these people on TikTok just love to roast us.
Dude, I don't look at any of the comments. It's too much for me. Let's move on to Sambo though. Dylan, who was your Sambo pick?
Probably easier than Alex Pereira. It's Islam.
Yeah, that's who I have as well. He's just dominant. Like he is so dominant. We saw him on the ground against Dustin getting that sweep. That was beautiful. Like
he's so dominant that he's just like, I know I can win a fight on the ground. Let's stand up and bang for a little bit. You know, like if he really wanted to, he could have had Dustin on the ground for all 5 rounds in that fight and probably could have finished it earlier, but he wanted to stand and bang.
It does feel like he has a little bit more pride than Khabib. He's like, well, let me see how good I am on the feet. Let me train and let me actually stand with some of these guys who think they're the best. Whereas Khabib was just
straight to the ground.
Yeah. If Khabib was still in the UFC, would you put him above Islam in Sambo?
It's so tough. Well, I do think Islam's a more well-rounded fighter. I think I would maybe still slightly lean Khabib.
Yeah, I think hearing the interviews where Islam and all of the Dagestani guys talk about how dominant Khabib is in training, even with them, they just can't compete with him. I think you have to pick Khabib.
And I think it'll be interesting to see Islam versus Arman, how he fares in that fight against someone with a Sambo base.
And last but not least category, my favorite one, mental warfare.
This one hurt. But as of right now, it's the correct answer. It's Dricus du Plessis.
Let's go. You heard it here first. Dylan loves Dricus.
No.
My mental warfare pick was also Dricus because Connor isn't really active right now.
Yeah.
It's tough to like pick Connor because he hasn't fought in so long. And he had that weird period where he was being really nice to guys like Dustin Poirier and even respectful at times. And now he's just on a coke bender. So I don't really know what to make of it.
With Dricus, you make your last 2 opponents cry. Like, it's like, what?
I think it's weird because he like doesn't really get emotional and doesn't feel things. So he just like gaslights everyone into believing what he's saying. And then, yeah, I think people really struggle to get to him So it makes them upset and get emotional because he's just saying what he thinks is true.
Yeah, he's just Drickus. Like,
yeah, he's just Drickus, and that pisses people off. Pisses you off.
can't stand the guy.
Okay, and that's our list for the best UFC fighters in every fighting style. If we missed a style, or if you guys disagree, especially with the jiu-jitsu, because there's a lot of options for that one, let us know in the comments, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Peace.
See ya.